This video has been a long time coming, and I've been asked to do this before, and that is to compare and contrast almost all of the current Sony bodies against each other as it pertains to shooting real estate. We're on the Sony system. I've had a journey through the Sony system over the years. I've been doing it full-time about 4 years, part-time before that. So 4 years ago, I got into this. Actually, the first camera I bought is the A7R3. So introducing the lineup, the A7 III, A7R3, A7R4, Alpha 1, and the newest one, the A7 IV. There are a lot of ways that these cameras are the same, and only a few ways that they're different. One thing that's the same with all of these cameras, as it pertains to real estate photography, the day-to-day real estate photography, is the image quality between them is negligible. The lowliest camera on this table, the A7 III, has fantastic image quality. And even though this is about a 4-year-old camera now, it still looks great. The biggest real difference that you're going to find between all of these cameras is not how the finished images look, but it is how you get there and how you work with them. So I'm going to give you my journey through this. First got the A7R3. Loved the camera. The only thing that I didn't really like about the A7R3 at the time was it's noisy. It's a 42 megapixel sensor. Photo sites are very tight on that sensor. It's very dense. And it's not the best in low light. So I figured, well, the A7 III, which when I got the A7R3, the A7 III was very hard to get. When it had just come out or was relatively new, everybody wanted one, and it was hard to get. The A7R3 was available, so that's what I got. Before then, I shot Nikon crop bodies, like I think the D7200 was the latest one I was coming from. Got the R3, decided to get the A7 III because of the noise. A7 III is a way, way cleaner camera than the R3. You can see the difference in resolution between 42 and 24. I mean, it's there. It's there. It's apparent. Anybody can see it. Even on the MLS, anybody who wants to jive you saying, oh, well, it gets, compressed down to 3 megabytes and you only need is, that's BS. You can see it. R3 doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter like the A7 III does. So not only is it less resolute, but it's less sharp because of that too. It has that anti-aliasing filter that's made to cut down on moire and all that stuff, but it's less sharp. So had these two cameras for a while. The A7R4, I just came up on one that was at a local camera shop at Sammy's Camera in Orange County, California, as I was there to take my family to Disneyland. And the A7R4 was very newly out, somewhat hard to get, but not like the A7 III when it came out. The A7R4 was somewhat hard to get. And I thought, wow, sure, let's go ahead and get it. They had one in stock, and I kind of backed myself into a corner telling the guy, hey man, if you have one in stock, I'll buy it. And he said, well, I have one, in the back. So there I was spending, $3,500 or whatever it is for the thing. But I really liked it. And it is noisy. It's the noisiest camera on this table. Even noisier than the A7R3. The things that the 4 brought over these two cameras really are not very different. So these cameras start really getting different at the A1. The A1 is a different camera, and the A7 IV is a different camera. So these, even though this is an A7R3 and this is an A7R4, I consider these three cameras the same generation, because even though this is a redesign of this camera, it really is this camera with better colors, better focusing, and more resolution. But it's not a generational jump like the Alpha 1, which is nuts, and we'll get into that. And the A7 IV, which is also pretty nuts, and we'll get into that. So I got the A7R4 on a whim. Used it for a while. Now, to continue following me in this story, you have to realize something. That is, I am a working professional photographer, day in, day out, full-time and a half this time of year. So when I talk about the differences between these cameras, the one thing that is most important to me is the usability of the cameras. And that's something that the new generation cameras have over the old generation cameras in spades. By that I mean, when I am out shooting real estate, I am wirelessly tethering to my iPad. There are tons of reasons why I do that. You can probably look through my videos and find something about it. These cameras are buggy, unstable. The range sucks as far as the range that you have to tether to. And they're just not super reliable. I knew with the newest of the three, the A7R4, which is the best of the three with regard to that, how far I could get before I have to do the reconnect thing and all that. And it was not all the way through a very large house. These cameras fix that. These are much, much more stable, a world more stable than these ones on the Sony Imaging Edge app. And the range is huge, especially the A1. So when I'm taking a look at the difference of these cameras and I'm comparing them between each other, okay, the biggest difference between these cameras is not the image quality, but it's the usability. It's the workflow. I shoot hundreds of homes per year. The workflow really, really matters. So I got to a point when the workflow of the A7R4, the bugginess of it, the 61 megapixel files, which are enormous, they're like 120 megabytes apiece. And to have even the lower end JPEG transmit from the camera back to the iPad so you can preview it and see if you have to make any adjustments to your settings takes a long time, especially over the janky connection that it has. The Alpha 1 I wasn't going to buy because it's obvious why. It's a $6,500 camera body. And it's a sports camera, really. I didn't need the speed. You know, houses don't move that fast. I didn't need 30 frames per second. But what I did need were files that were a little bit less heavy. The throughput, I just got this on a whim, hoping that the throughput of the Alpha 1 was faster than the A7R4, because this is something that you don't really find out there, people reviewing the throughput of the iPad, you know, the whole wirelessly tethering experience, these two, this versus this. I actually made a video on that. I'll link it up here. And you can take a look at that, where I take the iPad and I do the throughput of these two. And when I did that video, I actually didn't test it exactly how I should have. I should have put them at distance a little bit, because at distance, it's a huge difference between this and this in favor of the Alpha 1. So I got the Alpha 1. Loved it. You know, what's not to love? It's insane. So why then did I get the A7 IV? Well, I'd been thinking about getting an A7 IV anyway. And again, it's about workflow. That consideration being the Alpha 1 is a 50 megapixel body, and this is a 33 megapixel body. It's either 31 or 33. I think it's 33. So the workflow, not just out there shooting, but dumping files to editors, working with them myself, compositing multiple layers in Photoshop and whatnot, because I shoot flash ambient style. All of that, those files, delivering them to clients and how they work with them afterwards, all of that should be better on the A7 IV, as long as 33 megapixels is enough. So that's my journey and how and why I got each of these cameras. There are a couple differences that you will find between all of them. One is the colors. It's no secret that Sony colors are polarizing, I should say. Most people not liking them. Most people, including myself, choosing other manufacturers just as far as colors go. I'm shooting this on a Blackmagic camera right now. I have red cameras, and I like those colors better than I do the Sony colors. But having said that, with each camera, not just each generation, but these two are about the same. The A7 III has better colors than the R3. The big jump in colors was the A7R4. It really got a lot better with this camera. Better yet with the A1. These are pretty similar, the A1 and the A7 IV, because they're starting to get it figured out, and so these newer camera bodies are getting really good. If you take a look at the difference between like an A7 IV and an A7 III, and you can find that video out there, there's a bazillion of them, the colors are a huge difference between these two cameras in favor of the A7 IV. Colors are a big one, but the biggest difference as it pertains to real estate photography is how you work with these cameras. And by that, I mean the focusing systems on them. So I'm locked off on a tripod about 90% of the time. The other 10% of the time, I will shoot exteriors handheld. I will shoot detail shots handheld. That's where these systems really differ. So with the newest two cameras, the Alpha 1, A7 IV, I can trust and use the tracking autofocus. And so let's say I'm shooting the exterior of a house and I'm at f9, f10 or so. I can put the tracking spot on whatever. Let's say the address numbers on the side of the house is a good one. And I know that my focus isn't going to be pumping back and forth. And I can tell when it pumps back and forth because on, most stills lenses, you can see it breathing, right? So you can see the edges of the frame doing that. And it always makes you a little nervous, like, oh, is this thing not going to be in focus? With these two camera bodies, I don't have to worry about that. They are really, really sticky. This one, not so sticky. So with the A7R4, I typically will use AFS, and I will focus recompose kind of thing. So I will, if I'm at f10 and the house is 5 meters away, I will focus on something 5 meters, recompose, and that's that. And it's fine. It works fine. Same thing with these two. That using the single point, that AFS, and then focus recomposing is the best way to use them. These ones are faster because they track reliably things. So it's a lot easier to paint a target and recompose like that. And this is especially true when you're shooting shallow depth. And so if you're shooting, like I do a lot of detail shots of faucets and address numbers and flowers and things like that. And these cameras are a lot faster at that and more accurate at that than these ones are. So the way that you use them is a little bit different, one from the next. The other thing that's different is ISO performance. So the two R bodies, the R3 and the R4, especially the R4, this is an ISO 100 camera. And that means you are somewhat limited to how powerful your light can be. When you use a flash, I don't want to go anything above about ISO 320 with this camera, or I know I'm going to start to see noise in the image. R3 is the second noisiest camera. A7 III is a fantastic camera. I recommend this camera to people all the time. Alpha 1, obviously it's nuts. A7 IV, fantastic for low light performance. One final thing I wanted to mention before I forget about it, because I already did once, is the actual files themselves. So dynamic range between all these cameras is pretty similar. And I know that people will say, oh, well, you know, the A7 III is only, 12 stops, and these ones over here are 13 or whatever, and that's people shooting cameras at test charts, and I don't do that. I go out and work with them. And I will tell you that the dynamic range is very similar between them. However, there is a big difference between them in how robust the files are and how recoverable those shadows and highlights are when you're working with them in post. So I'm going to focus right now on this end of the table, really, because these two are they're old news, right? But especially now, these two bodies, the A7R4 and the A1, and I have a video comparing the two. The A7R4 has been tested by whoever, CMIT or whoever shooting charts, to have more dynamic range than the Alpha 1, which would also mean it has more dynamic range than the A7 IV. However, in practice, you will find that the A7R4, the file that it produces, is less malleable and less recoverable than the Alpha 1. And the Alpha 1 is better in that regard than the A7 IV also. A7 IV is a very clean camera, and it's a lot like the A7 III, where you can crank the ISO and you get clean images. But if you try to recover at about 2 stops under, trying to recover that with the A7 IV, your colors start going weird. And that's just not the case with the A1. The A1, you can get at least half a stop to a whole stop more of shadow recovery out of it than you can either of these two cameras. So if the A7R4 has more dynamic range when you're shooting a Xyla chart or something like that, that really doesn't translate to the real world, because in the shadows and in the highlights, you can recover files, you can recover that information a lot more on the Alpha 1 than any other camera on this table. So having said all of that, what are my recommendations? This might surprise a few people. My least favorite camera on this table is the A7R4. It's important to realize why that is, though. The A7R4 is the slowest camera here. A7 III is pretty slow also, but what the A7 III has that the R4 does not is excellent low light ability, and the files are much lighter. A7R4 is a bear to work with. It really is. The 61 megapixel resolution not only means that it sucks in low light, but it also means that your shutter speed has to be cranked in order to get those images sharp. The more resolution the sensor has, the higher your shutter speed needs to be, because you can really see that, that motion blur. It gets a little bit tougher now, but I think what I'm going to take out next is the A7R3. For the same reasons as the R4. So now we have 3 cameras left. Here's where I have to qualify my opinion going forward. The Alpha 1 is the best camera Not only on this table, but on the planet, really. But it's $6,500 for the Alpha 1. And that's going to put it out of reach for the majority of people. Really, professionals are the ones buying the A1s, mostly. So, as much as I hate to do it, for the day-to-day real estate, I'm going to take this one off. We're left with the A7 III and the A7 IV. That choice is easy. You know, it's the A7 IV. It's not as good of a camera as the Alpha 1. I don't expect it to be at, what is this, like 2,500 versus 6,500. But it does everything that I need it to do, with the exception that sometimes I do need that higher resolution, and I will reach for the A1 before I will any of these other cameras for that. A7R4 is the sharpest though, so if I need really, really high resolution and I can afford to work slowly, if I'm doing design work or something, the A7R4 is great for that. But day-to-day real estate stuff, A7 IV is where it's at. I hope you got some value from this. This wasn't an absolutely exhaustive comparison between all these camera bodies, but I hope I gave you enough insight about the different bodies as it pertains to real estate photography, particularly, to give you a roadmap as to which one could be right for you. Please like and subscribe. If there's some interest, I can do another one of these, a part 2, if you will, getting into some more specific things like the focusing systems and the colors and all that kind of stuff. But I just felt like that kind of stuff has been done out there. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what it's actually like as a working photographer to work with these cameras day in and day out. I do have experience with them all. I do own them all. I do use them all. So if you got any value from this, hit that like button, and I'll see you again soon. Peace.